Imagine a world where the idea of liberty was more than just a dream. It was a cause worth fighting for. In the mid-18th century, 13 colonies stretched along the Atlantic coast of North America, bound by ties to the British Empire, but increasingly restless under its rule. These were colonies built on hard work, trade, and a fierce sense of independence. Yet they were also part of the most powerful empire on Earth, an empire that would soon find itself at odds with these distant lands. This is the story of the American Revolution, a conflict that reshaped not only the lives of those who lived through it, but the future of an entire continent. To understand the American Revolution, we must first explore the roots of discontent that grew over decades within the colonies. The 13 colonies, each with its own economy, culture, and governance, were originally founded for various reasons, some for economic gain, others for religious freedom. By the early 18th century, these colonies were thriving, benefiting from the British policy of salutary neglect, which allowed them a significant degree of self-governance in exchange for economic loyalty. However, the relationship between the colonies and Britain began to change in the aftermath of the 7 Years' War, known in America as the French and Indian War. The war had been costly for Britain, and with a vast empire to manage, the British government looked to the colonies as a source of revenue to help pay off their war debt and finance the ongoing costs of empire. This marked the beginning of a series of policies that would ignite colonial resentment. The first of these was the Proclamation of 1763, which restricted colonial expansion westward, angering settlers eager for new land. The British government's attempts to assert control over the colonial economy further inflamed tensions. The Sugar Act of 1764 imposed duties on molasses and sugar imported into the colonies, cutting into the profits of colonial merchants and shipowners. But it was the Stamp Act of 1765 that truly galvanized opposition. This act required that all legal documents, newspapers, and even playing cards in the colonies carry a tax stamp, directly affecting a broad swath of colonial society. For many colonists, this was an intolerable violation of their rights, as they had no representation in the British Parliament that had imposed these taxes. The slogan, "No taxation without representation," became a rallying cry as protests erupted across the colonies. The Stamp Act Congress, convened in New York in October 1765, brought together representatives from 9 colonies to petition against the act. The unified resistance, including boycotts of British goods and intimidation of tax collectors, eventually forced Parliament to repeal the Stamp Act in 1766. However, the British government was not prepared to relinquish its control over the colonies. The Declaratory Act, passed alongside the repeal of the Stamp Act, asserted Parliament's authority to legislate for the colonies in all cases whatsoever. This statement of power set the stage for further confrontations, as the colonists increasingly questioned not just specific taxes, but the very nature of their relationship with Britain. As the 1760s progressed, the road to rebellion became clearer. The Townshend Acts of 1767 imposed new duties on imports of glass, lead paint, paper, and tea. These taxes were seen as another infringement on colonial rights, and the response was swift. Organized resistance took the form of non-importation agreements, where merchants and consumers alike refused to buy British goods. Women played a crucial role in this boycott, forming groups like the Daughters of Liberty to produce homemade goods and reduce reliance on British imports. The tension between Britain and the colonies escalated further in 1770 with the Boston Massacre. On a cold night in March, British soldiers, stationed in Boston to enforce order, opened fire on a crowd of colonists who had been taunting them, killing 5 men. This incident, widely publicized by colonial leaders like Samuel Adams and Paul Revere, inflamed anti-British sentiment across the colonies. The event was used as a powerful symbol of British tyranny and colonial victimization. Despite the growing unrest, Britain continued to assert its authority, culminating in the Tea Act of 1773. This act was intended to help the struggling British East India Company by allowing it to sell surplus tea directly to the colonies, bypassing colonial merchants and undercutting local businesses. To the colonists, this was yet another example of Britain's disregard for their economic interests and autonomy. The response was the now famous Boston Tea Party. On the night of December 16, 1773, a group of colonists disguised as Mohawk Indians boarded 3 British ships in Boston Harbor and dumped 342 chests of tea into the water. This act of defiance, while dramatic, was also seen by the British government as a direct challenge to its authority. In retaliation, Parliament passed the coercive acts, known in America as the Intolerable Acts, in 1774. These laws were designed to punish Massachusetts and restore British control. They included the closing of Boston Harbor, the revocation of Massachusetts Charter, and the Quartering Act, which required colonists to house British soldiers. Rather than isolating Massachusetts, these acts united the colonies in their opposition to British rule. The First Continental Congress met in Philadelphia in September 1774, bringing together representatives from 12 of the 13 colonies to coordinate their response to the Intolerable Acts. This Congress marked a significant step toward unity, as the colonies agreed to enforce a widespread boycott of British goods and began to prepare for possible military action. The stage was now set for open conflict. The colonial leaders, while still hoping for reconciliation, recognized that they were on a collision course with the British Empire. As 1775 dawned, the colonies were more determined than ever to defend their rights and liberties, even if it meant taking up arms against their own government. The spark that ignited the American Revolutionary War came in the spring of 1775, when tensions between the colonists and British authorities reached a boiling point. On April 18th, British General Thomas Gage, the military governor of Massachusetts, ordered his troops to march to the towns of Lexington and Concord to seize colonial military supplies and arrest revolutionary leaders Samuel Adams and John Hancock. However, the colonists had been preparing for such an action for months. Paul Revere and other writers spread the alarm, warning that the British are coming. On the morning of April 19, 1775, the British forces encountered a small group of colonial militia on the Lexington Green. Outnumbered and outgunned, the militia began to disperse, but shot, later known as the shot heard round the world, was fired. The skirmish that followed left 8 militiamen dead and several others wounded. The British then marched on to Concord, where they were met with much stiffer resistance. Hundreds of militiamen had gathered, and after a brief battle at the North Bridge, the British were forced to retreat back to Boston, harried all the way by colonial forces. The battles of Lexington and Concord marked the beginning of the Revolutionary War, but they were more than just military engagements. They were the first test of the colonists' resolve to resist British authority by force if necessary. In the wake of these battles, the Second Continental Congress convened in Philadelphia in May 1775. This Congress was tasked with managing the war effort and soon took the bold step of creating the Continental Army, appointing George Washington as its commander-in-chief. Washington, a respected Virginian with experience from the French and Indian War, was seen as a unifying figure who could bring together the disparate colonies in a common cause. The early months of the war were marked by both hope and uncertainty. While the colonial forces were able to force the British to evacuate Boston in March 1776, they faced numerous challenges, including shortages of weapons, ammunition, and trained soldiers. The British, meanwhile, prepared to return with overwhelming force, determined to crush the rebellion. As the war dragged on, the question of independence became increasingly unavoidable. Many colonists had initially hoped for reconciliation with Britain, but the realities of war and the intransigence of the British government began to change minds. The publication of Thomas Paine's pamphlet Common Sense in January 1776 was a turning point. Paine's powerful arguments for independence and Republican government resonated with a wide audience, helping to shift public opinion towards the idea of breaking away from Britain altogether. The stage was now set for a momentous decision that would change the course of history. The decision to declare independence from Britain was pivotal and contentious. In early 1776, the Continental Congress debated the move intensely. While advocates like John Adams and Richard Henry Lee pushed for independence, others hesitated due to potential repercussions. On June 7, 1776, Lee introduced a resolution declaring the colonies as free and independent states. Congress then appointed a committee, including Thomas Jefferson, to draft the declaration. Jefferson, noted for his eloquence, wrote the initial draft, which articulated the colonies' reasons for independence based on Enlightenment principles. The Declaration began with a preamble asserting unalienable rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, and listed grievances against King George III. After revisions, including removing a passage condemning the slave trade, the Declaration was adopted on July 4, 1776. It not only declared separation from Britain, but also laid out ideals of government and inspired the colonists. However, securing independence through war remained a challenge. The Declaration galvanized the colonial population, providing a cause worth fighting for despite the Continental Army's dire conditions. The 56 signers risked everything, understanding the high stakes of the defiant act. The war following the Declaration of Independence was arduous and marked by highs and lows. Early in the conflict, the Continental Army faced defeats, notably in New York and New Jersey, with the British appearing dominant. However, the Americans leveraged their vast land, determination, and support to persist. A turning point was Washington's daring crossing of the Delaware River on Christmas night, 1776, leading to victories at Trenton and Princeton, boosting American morale. The 1777 Battle of Saratoga was crucial. British General Burgoyne's surrender convinced France to support the Americans, which proved decisive. Despite further hardships, including the winter at Valley Forge and Southern campaigns, the Americans, aided by French forces, achieved a significant victory at Yorktown in 1781. This surrender led to peace negotiations and the Treaty of Paris in 1783, recognizing American independence and establishing borders from the Atlantic to the Mississippi River. Post-war America faced the challenge of nation-building. Despite achieving independence, the country was burdened with war debt and economic instability. The Articles of Confederation created a weak central government that struggled with interstate issues and economic problems. social and political upheavals, including unresolved issues of slavery and Native American relations, further complicated matters. Shays' Rebellion in 1786 underscored the need for a stronger government, prompting a 1787 convention in Philadelphia. Delegates, led by Washington and others, drafted a new constitution, establishing a federal system with checks and balances. The Constitution, ratified after debates and the addition of the Bill of Rights, became a model for democratic governance. Washington, as the first president, set crucial precedents while the nation began to stabilize and work towards fulfilling the ideals of liberty and justice. The American Revolution's legacy is profound and enduring. It was more than a fight for independence. It transformed political thought and governance. The principles of popular sovereignty and individual rights became foundational to American democracy and inspired global movements for freedom. The Revolution also challenged social hierarchies, sparking debates on slavery, women's rights, and Native American issues. It fostered a unique American identity based on liberty and self-government. Despite unresolved issues that led to future conflicts like the Civil War, the Revolution's ideals continued to drive social change and inspire efforts for justice. Its influence extended globally, affecting the French Revolution, Latin American independence movements, and the spread of democratic ideals. The Revolution's principles remain a powerful symbol of the quest for freedom and human rights.